Hello and welcome to BIAZA Brings You. Today we are going to be looking at green and blue social prescribing for zoos and aquariums. What is it? How does it work? How is it relevant to zoos and aquariums? And how can we utilize it to our best advantage? My name is Hamish Morrin. I am the Animal Collections Development Manager at Writtle University College, and as part of my role I am involved in developing green space conservation. I run our Zoom modules and some of our conservation education programs, and this is one of these important areas, I think, for zoos to develop in the area of nature connectedness and human well-being. So start from the beginning. What is green or blue social prescribing? Generally green is the commonly used one, but social prescribing itself is described by the NHS as connecting people to activities, groups and services in their community to meet the practical, social and emotional needs that affect their health and well-being. So the idea of this is that there are a huge amount of activities that we can take part in, especially those that allow us to interact with other people, that can help our general health and well-being, that are as effective in many cases as a direct medical intervention, and so they can be both beneficial to human well-being but also take some pressure off the NHS in terms of GP time, prescriptions, social services, etc. And the evidence is that for many people this can be as effective, if not more so, than medical interventions or therapy, particularly in cases such as people with mild to moderate depression or anxiety. Lifestyle changes and social prescribing have in many cases been shown to have positive effects similar to or better than taking medication, and they take away that element of side effects that are the potentials of most medications for mental health conditions. So there's a solid evidence base for this, and green or blue social prescribing is a subset of this and is nature-based activities that can improve well-being. So this can be going out and spending time in nature anywhere. It could be going to your local park, spending time in your garden, going to visit rivers, streams, going to the seaside, going out into perhaps more wilder areas, into our national parks, etc. Any sort of activity, and these can be physical activities, these can be mindfulness-based, arts-based activities, and especially anything with a social content where you also go out and do it in relation with other people. Who's it for? Well, everyone, really. Again, the evidence is that spending time in nature does benefit the majority of people. It can reduce stress, it can make you feel more connected to the world, especially senses people report a great sense of peace often in nature, and putting how they feel in their lives in context, especially a sense of perhaps a holistic sense of being engaged with the world. But there are people or populations that are especially suit. So people who have one or more long-term conditions, often with long-term mental or physical health conditions, the medical treatment of drugs, surgery, physiotherapy, etc. can be quite debilitating in some ways, or draining, even though it may be essential. And for those people, these kind of interactions help provide a stabilizing element, a positive element, and especially if it reduces reliance on things like regular use of medication, again with that reduction in side effects, can be really, really positive. It's also, especially, I mentioned before, low-level mental health issues. there is a lot of evidence that really for people with mild to moderate depression, anxiety, that lifestyle changes and social prescribing can be hugely beneficial. And in an era where we are having dramatic increases in the number of people who are diagnosed with things like depression, anxiety, etc., this is really, really important. For many people, medication is an important part of their treatment, but that doesn't mean it is the ideal option for everybody. And if there's a substantial population who could benefit from time spent in nature and engaging with nature rather than taking medication, then that both benefits the NHS and the cost of the NHS and also each individual person. So it's a win-win approach. The social prescribing part of it is very important for people who are lonely or isolated. This provides opportunities to go and spend time with people. And it takes away that difficulty often that people who are lonely or isolated have of making connections, because you are all going to do an activity together. And so if it is something like perhaps community gardening or tree planting or going and doing art in green spaces, you are doing that together with other people. It's a chance to interact with them, to engage with them in relation to this thing you have in common, and to help reduce that sense of loneliness or isolation. This is especially important often for people with long-term health conditions and people with serious mental health problems, and people who are older commonly do have the related factor of feeling lonely or isolated. It can really be of advantage to them. And anybody with complex social needs that affect their well-being. So this can often be people often who maybe have intersecting mental and physical health problems that make it perhaps both difficult for them to get out and interact with people physically, but also then emotionally challenged. People who have PTSD, other related trauma or severe anxiety, severe autism, etc., that makes it difficult to interact with people in perhaps what we might consider the normal round of society, although I always hesitate to use the word normal. It creates a context in which people like that can make connections and can be supported in interacting with other people and into finding activities that benefit their own well-being. What's the goal of all this? I mean, there is substantial money being put into this by the NHS and by various organisations around the UK and around the world. They're putting that money in for a reason. It is to improve especially mental health outcomes. As I said, there's a rise in mental health challenges. A lot of those are related to the way we live. There's a fair bit of evidence that at least part of it is the way our lives often disconnect us from nature, and we don't feel part of the natural world. And this can help with reducing that in a cost-effective and specifically an effective way. Also reduces health inequalities. So this is something that most people can access in some way. Most people have some access to nature, and so it reduces some of the challenges of lack of funding, especially in specific areas that actually there is the potential for the majority of people to have access to the benefits of the green or blue social prescribing. And practically, it's reduced demand on the health and social care systems. If people can benefit from these kind of activities rather than necessarily needing medication, therapy, GP appointments, social work appointments, that saves money, it reduces demand and stress for the NHS while still benefiting the people who need the help. So initial projects that are being run are focused mainly on making green social activities more resilient and more accessible. So by this they mean resilient. Essentially, there is a challenge that a lot of people set up small projects like this, but they may not have sufficient funding, they may not be reliable, they may not last long enough. And they need to be accessible. People who need access to them need to be able to get to them and take part in them. So the important factor is to have reliable activities that GPs and social workers can then direct their clients to, in the knowledge that their client will be able to access that activity, that it will be useful to them, that it will be ongoing. And this is very important to have that security. And this is an element where, stepping ahead of myself slightly, but zoos have the potential to be very useful in this particular goal. So what's the evidence base for all of this? Well, it's quite easy to go and have a look. Even if you don't have access to journals, you can go on Google Scholar, and if you look up green social prescribing, it's quite easy to find papers, especially summary papers, review papers that look at a range of interventions, what's been done and what the results were. There are a lot of different approaches that have been studied so far. They include everything from little trips like local parks or arboretums, people just going to places that are natural within their own environment. Guided outdoor activities, this can be anything from just, again, short walk in your local park up all the way to things like whitewater rafting, very dependent on the needs of the population that are being approached. Also a lot of artistic type of activities such as photography or journaling in nature, as well as all kinds of painting, drawing, any kind of artistic activity that have been shown to benefit mindfulness and nature connection, and quite a lot more. There's quite a range of different things that people have tried. Now, not every intervention works for every population, but the overall results of these studies tend to be positive outcomes for the majority of participants. So some examples, interventions, especially with children with ADHD, showed that educational interventions in nature resulted in longer periods of attention, ability to pay attention and engage, as opposed to classroom activities. Activities with families, so this is perhaps going to the park together, or in one case it was people being given vouchers for their local farmers market, resulted in reduced stress for both parents and children in these activities. Increased pro-social behaviour was noted in quite a few, again especially in children, but also frequently in older adults. Just the ability to interact with other people, and especially when children, there were several studies that showed that increased perhaps levels of willingness to work together and work in teams and interact positively with each other. And also for a lot of people suffering from mental health issues, the sense of connection to nature helped to mitigate their mental health issues. So it didn't cure them, didn't make them go away, but comments within some of these studies, people saying that it helped them put their feelings in context, that it helped reduce their immediate stress or anxiety, that it gave them a sense of peace and a place to sort of get away when they were struggling mentally or emotionally. It gave them an option to go somewhere where they felt they could recover. So it's really important positive evidence that doing these activities is beneficial for a wide range of people. All right, halfway through the talk, haven't really mentioned zoos or aquariums yet, but all of that was leading up to this. Where do zoos and aquariums fit in? Well, as an immediate and obvious point, zoos and aquariums are naturalistic environments, and they are frequently accessible to those living in urban areas. For a lot of people, there is a zoo or an aquarium or a farm park or something nearby to them. They are frequently accessible, as in you can drive to them. For those who don't have cars, many zoos and aquariums, there is public transport available. It is a place that people can go, and there are zoos all over the country. They are a place where people can go and they can see beautiful planting, they can see huge tanks of water, they can see naturalistic environments with animals in them, zoos and aquariums have a lot of fantastic resources that fit green social prescribing very well. Zoos and aquariums also have the facilities to support large numbers of visitors. Going out into perhaps what we might think of as pure nature, like a full-on nature reserve, can be difficult for people who have difficulty with perhaps physical movement, or who need support. Simply, we have the facilities, we have toilets, we have staff, we have first aiders, we have everything somebody might need if they have concerns about going out into perhaps more what we traditionally think of as nature, as a kind of unspoiled environment. Zoos and aquariums have the facilities to facilitate multiple activities. There are a lot of things that zoos are already doing. So there are places in zoos where often you can go for peace and quiet, and a lot of zoos have implemented quiet places or quiet days, especially for people suffering from anxiety, autism, and other similar issues, to give them that opportunity to engage without the distraction of a lot of noise or people. There are play spaces for children. It's fantastic for families. And lots of opportunity for volunteering, not just, obviously there's a traditional volunteering programs working around animals that may not be suitable for everybody, but there's fantastic opportunities for things like gardening within the zoo area. And for many people, volunteering is simply an option to be social with others. So there's docent volunteering as well, and is kind of educational volunteering create a lot of opportunities for people as well. And a lot of the studies on these have been done in places like local parks and things, because that's accessible to most people. Now they have the advantage over zoos that they are free, and zoos generally are not. However, zoos have animals in them, and so do aquariums, and for some populations, they might not be excited about the idea of going to their local park. They might find the idea of going to the zoo and watching animals much more engaging. So it's perhaps an important population could benefit from zoos and aquariums who might not otherwise want to engage with these kind of activities. So lots of opportunities for zoos and aquariums to be part of this. So what can we do? Well, for a start, you can look at the available information. You can, as I said, you can go into Google Scholar, you can find papers, you can look at the NHS, look at projects they've funded or been involved with, and identify things that you could do. Every zoo and aquarium has its own facilities, its own goals. Some are large, some are small. You may focus on specific species. You might have huge amounts of space and planting. Everyone is going to have their own possibilities that might be more achievable for them. So part of it is that first step of narrowing it down. What can we realistically do with the facilities and staff and resources that we have? And then the next step is then you can contact local GPs, you can contact charities, any social work organisations, anyone working in the space of green prescribing, and have these conversations and come to them and say, well, we have these resources, these possibilities. How does that fit in? What projects could we connect with? What would you like to see us do? And that gives you that possibility then to have people being having that green prescription of being directed to you as an organisation that can help them, which I think is incredibly useful in identifying that population and bringing them together. Could also go looking for sources of funding. So partially for projects. I think a lot of the large-scale NHS funding at time of recording is already in place, but there will be multiple waves of funding for this. And there are a lot of sources for small funding for small projects. So again, talking with your GPs, your charities, people working in this area around you might identify the funding. And very importantly, funding for research. One of the most important things I think we can do is do the research that proves that these projects help people, because it is another way of proving the value of zoos and aquariums to the community. Just another pillar of what zoos do, of what benefit they provide. And you can look at the ways, how can we increase accessibility for specific populations? Once you've decided who you're going to try and help, yes, do we want to create quiet spaces, do quiet days for people who struggle with noise and crowds? Can we perhaps make some of our spaces more accessible to people with physical challenges? Do we perhaps have opportunities for children to take part in planting? You know, what is it that you can make work? How can you make it so that that population that you would like people to send to you, if you want GPs and charities and social workers to send you certain groups that you can support, how do we make it so they are best sorted? And the reality is that none of us can make our facilities and our projects suitable for everyone. We're going to have to pick and be specific, and that is going to very much depend on your zoo, your aquarium, and your situation. So just identifying what can we do to actually make this more viable, more effective. And the very last thing I want to talk about is the bigger picture, because this is not just about well-being. There is evidence that nature connectedness is also linked with pro-environmental behaviours. So, by becoming a source of well-being for local populations, zoos and aquariums can also support their environmental education goals. So there's quite a lot of evidence that shows that doing these kind of activities, spending time in nature and feeling more connected to nature, does lead to people beginning to evaluate their own lives and whether they want to do things that are more supportive of nature, whether they want to change their own behaviours. And so there is the opportunity of drawing people in with the attraction of it becoming beneficial to them, of them improving their own health and well-being by interacting with the zoo, and that leading slowly to them wanting to be more pro-nature, more pro-conservation, to coming back and saying, I want to do more, what can I do? And you've already built that relationship. So it's another opportunity to add to the work you're already doing in environmental education. It also really supports the value of zoos and aquariums to their community. We all know that zoos do provide a lot to their local communities in education, in recreation, and engagement with nature, and building more well-being related activities just cements it further. And it's another way of showing what the value is of zoos and aquariums to their local population, to their local community. And that's going to be very important for zoos going into the future. And there's always the potential that some people who perhaps weren't really that attracted to zoos and aquariums, if they find that interacting with these organisations is actually beneficial to their health, might lead them towards a more positive view of zoos and aquariums and a more of a connection. So all of these things are intended really that these should be a win-win-win situation, that the individuals involved benefit because they have access to activities that build their well-being, their sense of nature connectedness, reduce their social isolation, support them dealing with mental, physical health challenges, benefits zoos and publicity and connection with their community and being able to draw on funding to run projects, and in having that further evidence of the benefit that zoos have. And it's beneficial to the health system overall because some people are able to access perhaps fewer of the sort of traditional hospital-based NHS kind of resources, potentially might benefit from these projects instead, and that reduces the pressure on the health service overall. And I think those provide fantastic opportunities for zoos, As I said, every facility is going to have its own possibilities. I would really urge you to look at what the possibilities are, and I'm sure there's tremendous support within BIAZA and within all BIAZA members to help and make suggestions, to help draw on research and projects that other people have done so that you can create a project that really adds value to your collection and your facility. Thank you for your time.